Wait, I know you. We went to school together, right?
Oh my gosh, I remember you. It's been so long.
The rain hammered Seattle like it had something personal against the city. Not the gentle mist that usually draped over the Pacific Northwest, but sheets of water that turned the streets into rivers and the air into something you could almost swim through. From the 58th floor of the Rainier Summit Tower, Marcus Sterling watched the city blur and distort through the water-streaked glass, his reflection ghost-like against the storm. The office around him sprawled 40 feet in every direction, each surface a testament to minimalist perfection. Italian marble that cost more per square foot than most people made in a month. Norwegian wood panels that still smelled faintly of pine forests. Japanese paper screens that filtered the dying light into something ethereal and cold. At 32, Marcus had everything the world told him to want. His data compression algorithm had revolutionized cloud storage, making him worth more than some small country's GDP. The patents alone generated 8 figures monthly, and that was before counting the government contracts, the enterprise licenses, the venture capital firm that bore his name. His collection of vintage cars sat in a climate-controlled garage beneath the building, none of them with more than 100 miles on the odometer. His art collection, curated by experts from Sotheby's, included 3 Pollocks and a Basquiat that he'd never actually looked at for more than 30 seconds. But tonight, standing against the glass with Seattle drowning below him, Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that no amount of money seemed to ease. It was a peculiar kind of suffocation, the kind that came from having everything except a reason to wake up that wasn't printed on a quarterly earnings report. He pressed his palm against the cold window and watched his handprint fade, thinking about how quickly all traces of human warmth disappeared in spaces like this. His phone buzzed against the glass desk, the sound sharp in the silence. Rebecca Chen, his assistant, with her third reminder about tonight's charity gala at the Fairmont. $500 a plate to save the rainforests or the whales, or possibly the rainforest whales. He'd signed the check without reading the cause. The thought of another evening drowning in champagne bubbles and empty conversations made his chest tighten further. He could already see it. The same faces, the same hollow laughter, the same subtle calculations behind every smile. Who was worth talking to? Who could be useful? Who was rising? Who was falling? Human connection reduced to LinkedIn profiles and net worth estimates. He picked up the phone before Rebecca could call again, her efficiency both a blessing and a curse. "Cancel it," he said, watching lightning fracture the sky into brief, brilliant fragments. "Tell them I had an emergency conference call with Tokyo. Make it sound urgent but vague. And Rebecca? Don't have dinner sent up tonight." Her pause lasted just long enough to register surprise. Marcus Sterling never missed galas. They were where deals got made, where power congregated, where the invisible threads that held the city together became almost visible after the third martini. And he certainly never skipped meals. His life parceled out in careful increments of productivity and nutrition. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. Should I have Raymond bring the car around? In case you decide to go out?" Something shifted in his chest, a tectonic plate of routine suddenly unstable. "No," he heard himself say, the word surprising him with its certainty. "I'll walk." "Walk?" She couldn't hide her shock. "Sir, it's pouring. And the security protocols." "I'll walk, Rebecca." The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. He hadn't walked the streets of Seattle alone in 5 years. Security protocols, insurance policies, the invisible walls that money built around you, all of it had conspired to keep him sealed in climate-controlled bubbles, moving from tower to car to venue and back again. His life had become a series of smooth transitions between different expensive boxes, and suddenly the thought of it made him want to punch through the glass just to feel something shatter. 20 minutes later, he stood on the sidewalk, rain soaking through his $3,000 Armani suit like it was paper. The sensation was strange, almost violent in its immediacy. Water ran down his neck in cold rivers, his Italian leather shoes squelched with each step. And, for the first time in years, Marcus felt genuinely, viscerally alive. The rain didn't care about his net worth. It didn't check his portfolio before deciding how hard to fall. It just was, and there was something profound in that simplicity. He walked without destination, letting the city guide him. The familiar streets near his office gave way to neighborhoods he'd forgotten existed, past the gleaming restaurants where he held business dinners that cost more than most people's rent. past the galleries where he bought art, based on spreadsheets of appreciation rates rather than actual appreciation, past the theaters where he had a permanent box he never used, because there was always another deal to close, another acquisition to manage, another zero to add to the endless string of numbers that had become his life. The transition happened gradually, then suddenly. Glass and steel gave way to brick and mortar. Teslas became Toyotas, then buses. Then people walking because they had to, not because they chose to. The rain seemed softer here, or maybe it was just that the buildings were closer together, creating a kind of urban canopy. Neon signs reflected in puddles, fracturing into abstract art that no gallery would ever display, but that contained more truth than anything in his collection. The corner spoon appeared like something from a dream, or maybe a memory he'd been trying to forget. Its neon sign struggled against the rain, half the letters dark. The survivor still fighting to spell out something that might have been corner, or might have been come. The windows were fogged with warmth and grease, shapes moving inside like shadow puppets in a show he'd once known by heart. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, rain streaming down his face, and remembered. His father bringing him here after Little League games, back when his father still worked construction and had hands that could build things instead of just signing checks. Pancakes drowning in syrup, hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and his father's laugh, rich and real in a way Marcus hadn't heard in 15 years. Not since the cancer, not since the medical bills that had started Marcus's desperate climb toward financial security, not since success had become less about wanting things and more about never being vulnerable again. The bell above the door announced him with a tired chime that might have been the same one from 25 years ago. The smell hit him immediately: bacon grease, black coffee, and that particular scent of wet wool that belonged to places where real people took shelter from real weather. The floor was black and white checkered linoleum, scuffed and worn but clean. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, each one cracked in unique patterns like fingerprints of time. A handful of customers hunched over their meals, none of them looking up. In a city where everyone was always networking, always performing, always on, the indifference was almost miraculous. Marcus chose a booth in the back, the springs creaking under his weight with a sound like sighing. The tabletop was Formica, scratched with decades of use, initials and dates carved by people who'd wanted to leave some mark, however small. He traced one with his finger. TM plus SK, Itenjo by Bashutsi. Wondered if they were still together. If they still came here. If love scratched into Formica lasted longer than love signed in prenuptials. Be with you in a second, honey. The voice froze him mid-motion, his hand halfway to removing his soaked jacket. It was a voice he'd have known anywhere, though it had been 14 years since he'd heard it. The same slight huskiness, like she'd just woken up or was about to fall asleep. The same way of making honey sound both impersonal and intimate. He looked up, and time did that thing it does in movies. But never in real life. It stopped. Eleanor Hartley stood 3 feet away, coffee pot in hand, and she was exactly the same and completely different all at once. The honey blonde hair he remembered was pulled back in a messy bun, wisps escaping to frame a face that had traded teenage softness for something sharper, more defined. The kind of face that had learned to ration smiles, to save them for when they mattered. Her uniform hung loose on her frame, faded pink polyester that had been washed too many times. There was a small burn scar on her left wrist that hadn't been there at Northwood High, and her nails were cut short, no polish, nothing that would interfere with work. But her eyes green with flecks of gold, the kind of eyes that had made him lose debate championships because he'd forgotten his arguments. Those hadn't changed at all. They still held that particular light, the one that suggested she was seeing things others missed, filing them away for later when she'd transform them into something beautiful. Eleanor had always seen the world differently, like she was looking at the negative space, the area between things where the real truth lived. She hadn't recognized him yet, already turning toward another table where a trucker was holding up his empty cup. Marcus watched her move through the diner with the kind of efficient grace that came from too many double shifts, too many sore feet, too many nights when tips didn't add up to enough. But there was something else in her movement, a careful navigation around the manager who stood by the register. Peterson, his name tag said, a thick-set man with small eyes and hands that seemed to find excuses to touch Eleanor's shoulder when he squeezed past, her lower back when he reached around her for the cash drawer. Just coffee, Marcus managed when she returned, keeping his head down, letting his rain-soaked hair fall across his face. Black, She poured without ceremony, the stream of coffee precise and practiced. Not a drop spilled, despite the slight tremor in her hand. This close, he could see the details that distance had hidden. The way her fingers were still stained with something that might have been paint, or might have been wishful thinking. The thin chain around her neck with a charm he couldn't quite see. The way she held herself like someone who'd learned to take up less space. To avoid notice. To survive instead of thrive. When she moved to the next table, he heard her genuine warmth with the elderly woman counting change. "Don't worry about it, Martha. The pie's on the house tonight." "I can pay," Martha protested, coins clicking on the formica. "I know you can, but it's Thursday, and Thursday pie is always free for my favorite customer." Marcus knew it wasn't Thursday. It was Tuesday. He watched Eleanor slip a $5 from her own tips into the register to cover the pie, watched her smile at Martha, like she'd done her a favor by accepting charity disguised as kindness. That was Eleanor, even in high school. She'd been the one who made sure everyone was included, who shared her lunch with kids who'd forgotten theirs, who made being kind look effortless when Marcus knew it was anything but. For an hour, he nursed his coffee and observed. The dinner rush, such as it was, brought in a dozen more customers. Construction workers with concrete dust in their hair, night shift nurses grabbing caffeine before heading to the hospital, a young mother with 2 kids, who Eleanor let color on placemats, while their mother counted out exact change for grilled cheese sandwiches. Eleanor moved between them all like a conductor orchestrating a symphony only she could hear. Knowing who needed conversation and who needed silence, who could afford dessert and who needed it, slipped onto their bill as a mistake. But always, she navigated around Peterson. When he stood too close at the coffee station, she found reasons to be elsewhere. When his hand lingered on her shoulder, she twisted away with practiced subtlety. When he made comments about her assets being good for business, she smiled the kind of smile that was really armor, deflecting without engaging. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and unfamiliar. He'd felt anger before at competitors, at inefficiency, at himself. But this was different. This was the kind of rage that made you want to break things just to hear them shatter. To remind the world that some things shouldn't be endured, shouldn't be normalized, shouldn't be the price anyone paid for a paycheck. When he finally left, Marcus placed $200 bills under his cup with a note written on a napkin. "For you and for Martha's pie, from someone who remembers when kindness didn't cost so much." The rain had softened to a drizzle, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind was already working, making calls as his driver summoned finally from the patient circling he'd been doing for 2 hours navigated through the wet streets. By the time he reached his penthouse, William Cross, the city's most discreet private investigator, was already on the case. "I need everything," Marcus said, staring out at the city lights. "But carefully. She's not a target. She's—" He paused, searching for words. "She's someone who should have been more." The report arrived the next afternoon, delivered by hand in a sealed envelope. Marcus read it 3 times, each pass making his hands clench tighter. Eleanor's father, Richard Hartley, had developed Charcot-Marie tooth disease 6 months after her high school graduation, a progressive neuromuscular disorder that slowly stole mobility, independence, dignity. The medical bills had devoured her college fund within a year. She'd sold everything: her father's house, her car, her art supplies that had been gathered over years of birthdays and Christmases. The Rhode Island School of Design scholarship had been full tuition, but not living expenses, not materials, not the plane tickets to come home when her father had his first major fall. She tried to make it work for 1 semester, working 3 jobs while taking full course loads, sending every penny home. But when her father had been hospitalized for pneumonia, a common complication when muscles weakened, she'd had to choose. The art that defined her, or the father who'd raised her alone after her mother died. It hadn't been a choice at all. Now she worked 2 jobs, the diner and a night shift stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store. Every penny went to her father's care and her younger brother Benjamin's community college tuition. Benjamin, the report noted, was brilliant straight A's in computer science, already freelancing as a programmer. But Eleanor insisted he stay in school, get the degree she couldn't. Peterson had a history that made Marcus's rage crystallize into something cold and purposeful. 3 harassment complaints, all settled quietly with NDAs. He skimmed from the tip pool, taking 20% for management. He altered time cards, shaving 15 minutes here, 30 there, always just below what would trigger oversight. He had a particular fondness for young waitresses who couldn't afford lawyers, couldn't afford to lose their jobs, couldn't afford to do anything but endure. Marcus set down the report and stared at the rain beginning again outside his window. Money could solve Eleanor's problems in an instant. He could write a check that would change everything. But he knew Eleanor well enough to know she'd never accept charity. She'd been the only person at Northwood who'd ever challenged him intellectually, who'd seen through his confidence to the desperate kid underneath. Pride had been her armor then, and he doubted that had changed. Pride was sometimes all people had left, and taking it away, even with good intentions, was its own kind of cruelty. The solution came to him at 3 in the morning, when the city was quiet enough to think. Not charity, but opportunity. Not pity, but recognition of talent wasted. He would create a position at the Sterling Foundation lead creative director for their new arts education initiative. The salary would be 6 figures, the benefits comprehensive, the work exactly what Eleanor had always dreamed of doing. But first, he had to deal with Peterson. Marcus bought the building that housed the Corner Spoon through a shell company, along with the 3 buildings on either side of it. The purchase was completed in 18 hours, cash deal, no contingencies. Peterson's lease, it turned out, had a morality clause that included harassment. The previous landlord had been willing to look the other way. Marcus wasn't. The next evening, he returned to the Corner Spoon. Same booth, same coffee. But this time, he carried a leather portfolio and a plan. The dinner rush was in full swing, and he waited until there was a lull, until Eleanor could spend more than 30 seconds at his table. When she approached with the coffee pot, he saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the moment when the expensive suit and the voice clicked into place. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, something that might have been shame, before settling on a careful neutrality. "Marcus Sterling," she said flatly. "Come to see how the other half lives?" "Come to fix a mistake," he replied, sliding the portfolio across the table. "The foundation found your RISD portfolio online. Your vision is exactly what we need for the new program." She didn't touch the portfolio, keeping her hands wrapped around the coffee pot, like it was an anchor. "How did you?" She stopped, understanding flooding her features. "You had me investigated. I had your work evaluated." He corrected. "There's a difference. Is there? Rich boy plays savior to the poor waitress? That's the story you're writing?" "The story I'm writing is about talent being wasted. About someone who could change how kids see art being stuck refilling coffee cups for people who don't see her. Maybe I like being invisible." "No," he said quietly. "You don't. You never did. You just learned to survive it." She flinched like he'd struck her. "You don't know anything about what I've learned. I know you still paint." He gestured to her hands. "Ultramarine, under your fingernails. Its oil base takes days to fully wash out. I know you gave Martha free pie and covered it yourself. I know you work 16-hour days and still make sure Benjamin stays in school. I know Peterson has been harassing you for 2 years and you endure it because you need this job. Stop." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Just stop." Peterson chose that moment to lumber over, his bulk casting a shadow across the table. "Eleanor, you've got other customers. This isn't social hour." Marcus stood slowly, using every inch of his 6'2" frame. The movement was deliberate, predatory in its precision. "Mr. Peterson, I'd be very careful how you speak to Miss Hartley. And who the hell are you?" "I'm the new owner of this building. As of yesterday. And I've been reviewing your employment history with great interest. Did you know that altering employee time cards is a federal crime? The Department of Labor takes wage theft very seriously." Peterson's face went from red to white in seconds, the color draining like someone had pulled a plug. "You can't. I have a lease." "Had." Past tense. "Your lease was terminated this morning for violations of the morality clause. You'll find the notice taped to your office door. You have 48 hours to vacate. I'd suggest you use that time to consider how you'll explain the 3 harassment settlements to your next employer. If you can find one." Peterson's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. He looked at Eleanor, then at Marcus, then back at Eleanor. "You little..." "Choose your next words very carefully," Marcus said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. I have lawyers who bill more per hour than you steal in a month. Would you like to meet them? Peterson backed away, his hands clenching and unclenching. He retreated to his office, and they could hear drawers slamming, items being thrown into boxes. Several customers looked up, surprised by the commotion. Marcus turned back to Eleanor, who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. The interview is tomorrow, at 2. The foundation director will be expecting you. No strings, no obligations. Just come and see what your future could look like. Why? She asked. Why do you care? He thought about lying, about making it purely professional. But Eleanor had always been able to see through his facades. Because 17 years ago, we both applied for the Harrison grant, $5,000 that would have changed everything for whoever got it. You deserved it as much as I did, maybe more. Your essay was better. Your grades were identical to mine. Your need was just as great, but I was hungrier, more desperate, more willing to do whatever it took. I spent weeks researching the selection committee, figuring out what they wanted to hear. I tailored every word to their biases, while you just told your truth. I got the grant. That grant got me MIT, and MIT got me everything else. Eleanor's hands tightened on the coffee pot. You're saying you cheated? Number, I played the game better. But the game was rigged from the start. And we both know it. I had time to research because I didn't have to work after school. I had a computer to write multiple drafts, while you handwrote yours in study hall. I had a mother who could proofread while your father was working double shifts. The playing field was never level, Eleanor. I just pretended it was, so I could feel like I earned it. You did earn it. So did you. The difference is, I got it. He pushed the portfolio closer to her. This isn't charity. It's not pity. It's a correction. The world missed out on what Eleanor Hartley could have created. I'm just trying to minimize the damage. She finally set down the coffee pot, her hands shaking slightly. And if I say no, then Peterson still gets fired, the building still gets renovated, and you still deserve better than this. But the offer stands regardless. He left before she could respond, but not before seeing something shift in her eyes, not quite hope, but maybe the memory of what hope used to feel like. The Sterling Foundation occupied 6 floors of a glass tower that caught the morning light like a prism, sending rainbows across the marble lobby. Eleanor arrived 15 minutes early, wearing her best blazer, the one from her RISD interview, still carefully preserved in dry cleaning plastic for 13 years. The receptionist, a young man with kind eyes and an encouraging smile, directed her to the 48th floor without making her feel like she didn't belong there. The elevator rose smoothly, and Eleanor watched the city shrink below her. Somewhere down there was the diner. Was Peterson probably still packing? Was her father in his wheelchair watching game shows? Was Benjamin in class learning about algorithms and data structures? Up here, the air felt different. Thinner, maybe. Or just cleaner. Like possibility had been pumped in through the vents. Dr. Miriam Chen, the foundation director, was nothing like Eleanor had expected. Instead of the severe suit and severe expression she'd imagined, Miriam wore jeans and a paint-splattered shirt that looked intentional but probably wasn't. Her office wasn't the sterile corporate space Eleanor had braced for, but a chaos of children's artwork, half-finished sculptures, and walls that had been turned into murals by visiting artists. Your portfolio was extraordinary, Miriam said without preamble, gesturing for Eleanor to sit on a couch that had definitely seen better days. The way you capture emotion through color, the accessibility of your technique, it's exactly what our education program needs. We want to bring art to underserved schools, to kids who think creativity is a luxury they can't afford. We need someone who understands that struggle. Because I'm poor? Eleanor asked, the defensiveness automatic. Because you're talented, and you've survived. Miriam corrected. Do you know how many trust fund artists apply here? They've never had to choose between paint and food. They've never had to create beauty when their world was falling apart. They make art because they can. You make art because you have to. That's the difference between decoration and truth. They talked for 2 hours, but Eleanor knew within the first 10 minutes that this was real. Not a trap, not charity dressed up as opportunity, but actual work that mattered. The position involved developing curricula, training teachers, mentoring young artists, and yes, creating her own work that would be used as teaching examples. The salary was $120,000 a year, with full benefits including family health care coverage. When would I start? Eleanor heard herself asking. Monday if you can. We have a program launching in 3 schools next month, and I'd like your input on the materials. Eleanor thought about the diner, about the customers who depended on her, about Martha, and her free Thursday pie. I need to give 2 weeks' notice. Miriam smiled. Marcus said you'd say that. Take the time you need. The job will be here when you're ready. She accepted the position that afternoon, calling from the lobby because she couldn't wait until she got home. Her father cried when she told him the salary. Benjamin whooped so loudly she had to hold the phone away from her ear. And Eleanor stood in that marble lobby, watching rainbows dance across the walls, and felt something she hadn't felt in 13 years. The future opening up like a flower, in fast-forward photography. Her 2 weeks' notice at the diner included a special severance package for Martha, enough pie money for a year, delivered through a contest Martha had mysteriously won. Peterson was gone by the second day, escorted out by security after trying to return after hours. The new manager, Sophia, was one of Eleanor's suggestions, a business student who'd been working the night shift while getting her degree. The grocery store was harder to leave. Her manager there, Mr. Mester, Kim, had always been kind, letting her adjust her schedule when her father had appointments, pretending not to notice when she was too exhausted to stalk at full speed. She recommended Benjamin for her position, and Mr. Kim hired him on the spot, knowing the family connection meant reliability. The first months at the foundation transformed everything. Eleanor and Benjamin pooled resources to move their father to a house with wheelchair access and a full-time nurse. The place had a sunroom where Richard could paint. His hands were weak but not useless, and art therapy helped maintain what mobility remained. Benjamin transferred to the University of Washington, his tuition covered by the foundation's employee education benefit. He still worked part-time for Mr. Kim, but now it was for experience and spending money, not survival. And Eleanor began to paint again. Really paint, not just stolen moments with cheap acrylics, but oils on proper canvas, with proper brushes, in proper light. Her apartment, a 1-bedroom in Capitol Hill that cost more in rent than she used to make in 3 months, slowly filled with canvases, landscapes that weren't quite real, portraits that showed internal weather systems, abstracts that looked like joy felt when you were too tired to feel it. The foundation work exceeded even her imagination. She developed a curriculum that brought working artists into schools, not to lecture but to create alongside students. She established a mentorship program that paired established creators with promising kids, with stipends for materials and transportation. She launched a scholarship fund for students whose talent outweighed their bank accounts, remembering her own RISD acceptance and all the reasons she couldn't take it. Marcus attended every major event, standing in the back, watching her light up as she talked about the students' work. He never pushed, never assumed, just existed in her orbit like a planet that had learned patience. They fell into a rhythm, late meetings that turned into dinners, strategy sessions that became conversations about art and ambition, about fathers and failures, about the people they'd been and the people they were becoming. You know, I had such a crush on you in high school, Eleanor admitted one evening over Chinese takeout in her office, surrounded by student portfolios. No, you didn't, Marcus said automatically. I did. You were the only person who could keep up with me in English class. Remember when we had that debate about Gatsby? You argued that he was a hero, and I argued he was a villain, and we went so over time that Mr. Peterson, different Peterson, thank God, had to physically separate us. You won that debate. You let me win. No, Marcus said quietly. You won. You always won. When it mattered. Eleanor set down her chopsticks, studying him. Is that why you never asked me to prom? I was terrified you'd say no. I was terrified you wouldn't ask. They sat with that admission between them. Years of parallel loneliness suddenly visible. All the paths not taken. All the words not said. All the possibilities that had been sacrificed to necessity. I thought about you, Marcus said finally. At MIT, when everything was happening so fast, when the algorithm started working, when the money started coming in, I'd think about that debate, about how you saw through Gatsby's green light to the darkness behind it. You were the only person who ever made me question whether success was worth it. And what did you decide? That it was, as long as I could share it. But by the time I had something to share, you were gone. No social media, no digital footprint. It was like you'd been erased. I was hiding, Eleanor admitted. From everyone who'd known me before, who'd expected things from me. It's easier to fail when no one's watching. You didn't fail. You chose. There's a difference. Eleanor designed a new logo for the foundation that spring. 2 hands reaching toward each other. Almost touching. Fingers stretched across negative space that looked like possibility. When Marcus saw it, something shifted in his expression. You know, don't you? Eleanor said. You've always known. Known what? That I was half in love with you in high school. That I spent senior year working up the courage to ask you to prom. I spent senior year working up the courage to say yes, he admitted. Guess we were both cowards. Not anymore, she said, and kissed him. It should have been awkward. 14 years of history, of different paths, of different worlds. But it wasn't. It was like finding a song you'd forgotten you knew, the melody coming back note by note until you were singing along like no time had passed at all. 6 months passed in a blur of possibility. The Foundation's programs expanded to 12 cities. Eleanor's first gallery show, encouraged by Miriam, supported by Marcus. But entirely her own achievement, sold out in 3 hours. The paintings went for more than she'd made in 5 years at the diner, and she donated half to the Foundation's scholarship fund because she could, because it mattered, because success meant nothing if you climbed the ladder alone. Marcus found himself leaving the office at reasonable hours, discovered what his penthouse looked like in daylight, learned that happiness wasn't something you achieved, but something you practiced. He started joining Eleanor at the community center she'd established in the old diner space, teaching kids about coding while she taught them about color. Watching her work, seeing her patience with struggling students, her joy in their breakthroughs, he understood that she'd been teaching all along. Every free pie, every covered shift, every moment of grace in that dingy diner had been a lesson in how to be human when the world wanted you to be less. Then Harrison Blackwood entered their lives like weather, sudden and destructive. Harrison ran Apex Dynamics, Sterling Industries' primary competitor. He'd been watching Marcus's success with the bitter attention of someone who believed the universe owed him better cards. Harrison had gone to Harvard when Marcus went to MIT, had started his company first, had done everything right. But Marcus's algorithm had been better, faster, more elegant. Harrison's company was successful, worth hundreds of millions, but in the tech world, second place was just first loser. When he learned about Eleanor, about her access to Sterling Industries systems through the Foundation, about her artistic connections, about her relationship with Marcus, he saw opportunity, not to steal technology, though that would be a bonus, but to hurt Marcus where it mattered, to prove that even titans had Achilles' heels, preferably ones that looked good in a dress. The gallery contact came through legitimate channels. Sebastian Rothschild, a curator from New York's Meridian Gallery, reached out about a solo exhibition. His credentials were impeccable. Columbia MFA, former Museum of Modern Art, a client list that read like a who's who of contemporary art. The opportunity was perfect, too perfect. Eleanor would realize later. But artists are trained to recognize beauty, not deception. And Sebastian was very beautiful indeed. Tall, cultured, with the kind of casual elegance that made you feel sophisticated just by proximity. He had that particular New York quality of making Seattle seem provincial just by existing. And Eleanor, despite her success, still carried enough insecurity to be susceptible to that kind of gravitational pull. He visited Seattle 3 times over 2 months. Each visit carefully orchestrated. Coffee at the Olympic Sculpture Park, where he demonstrated encyclopedic knowledge of every piece. Dinner at Canlis, where he ordered wine in French and made it seem natural rather than pretentious. Long discussions in her studio about art and ambition and the future she deserved, always professional, but with an undercurrent of something that might have been attraction if she'd been paying attention to anything besides the opportunity. The art world is all about access now, he said over wine at their 3rd dinner, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass in a way that was deliberately hypnotic. Physical galleries are just one component. The digital portfolio is everything. Collectors want to see an artist's complete evolution, their process, their depth. We're talking about buyers in Shanghai, Dubai, Moscow, places where your physical work might never travel, but your digital presence can make you a millionaire overnight. Eleanor listened, entranced by the possibility. She'd been creating for a year now. Prolifically, obsessively, making up for lost time. Her apartment was crammed with canvases, and the Foundation had storage units full of more. The idea of it all being accessible, searchable, saleable, it was intoxicating. Meridian has developed a new secure platform. Sebastian continued, leaning forward conspiratorially. Military-grade encryption. We're partnering with tech companies to ensure artists' work is protected while being globally accessible. It's revolutionary, really. Changes everything about how we curate, how we sell, how we create value. We're asking all our featured artists to upload their complete works. Think of it as a digital retrospective that never ends. Eleanor uploaded her portfolio from the Foundation computer, using her access to ensure the massive image files transferred quickly. The link Sebastian provided looked legitimate, the interface professional, the upload smooth with a progress bar and everything. She worked late into the night, organizing, categorizing, writing descriptions for each piece. It felt like assembling her life's work, like building a monument to survival and triumph. She didn't know that hidden in those seemingly innocent packets of data was a Trojan horse. Sophisticated enough to slip past most security systems. Patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. It was elegantly designed, like a virus that knew how to wear evening clothes. It burrowed into the Foundation's system, then followed the network connections to Sterling Industries' main servers, mapping, recording, waiting. At 3:17 in the morning, 4 days after Eleanor's upload, Sterling Industries' security system lit up like a war zone. Someone was accessing the core algorithm, the compression technology that was the company's beating heart. Not just accessing, downloading, copying, stealing 18 years of innovation in minutes. Marcus got the call at 3:23. By 3:30, he was in his office, watching his security team trace the breach in real time. The code that had built his empire was hemorrhaging into the darkness, and every trail led back to one login. Eleanor Hartley. She had complete access. James Morrison, his security chief, said grimly. Former NSA, Morrison knew his business. The timing coincides with her computer activity earlier this week. Large upload, then this download. The IP addresses match. The evidence is definitive. The evidence is wrong, Marcus said. But even he heard the uncertainty in his voice. The data was clear, crystalline in its implications. Every log, every timestamp, every digital fingerprint pointed to Eleanor. Sir, Morrison said carefully, I know she's important to you, but the facts are incomplete. Run it again. They ran it 5 times. The result was the same. Eleanor's credentials, Eleanor's computer, Eleanor's access pattern. The algorithm was already appearing in Apex Dynamics patent applications, filed with suspicious speed. The board convened an emergency meeting at 7. 12 faces around a mahogany table, each worth more than most countries' GDP, each looking at Marcus with expressions that ranged from sympathy to suspicion. The theft represents potential losses in the billions, the CFO said. Our competitive advantage is gone. Harrison Blackwood has already begun implementing the technology. We need to involve law enforcement immediately, the general counsel advised. The longer we wait, the harder it becomes to prove theft. She needs to be arrested before she can destroy evidence. 24 hours. Marcus negotiated, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. Give me 24 hours to investigate internally before we involve law enforcement. Marcus, the board chair said gently, I understand your personal feelings, but 24 hours. If I can't find another explanation, I'll make the call myself. He drove to Eleanor's apartment as dawn broke pink over the sound, the city waking up to a day that felt too normal for what was happening. She answered the door in paint-stained clothes, joy bright in her eyes, and his heart broke a little at what he had to do. Sebastian called, she said before he could speak. Meridian wants to move forward with the exhibition. They're sending contracts today. Marcus, this is everything. She stopped, seeing his face, reading disaster in the lines around his eyes. What's wrong? He told her everything, watching her joy crumble into horror, then disbelief, then a kind of rage he'd never seen from her before. She pulled up the emails from Sebastian on her phone, scrolling through them with shaking fingers. But it's real. Look, the gallery website, his LinkedIn, everything checks out. The gallery might be real, but Sebastian Rothschild isn't. Eleanor, you've been targeted. They used you to get to me, to the company. The words hung between them like a blade. Eleanor's face went white, then red, then white again. She sank onto her couch, the phone falling from nerveless fingers. I didn't. Marcus, you have to believe me. I would never. I know, he said, but the pause before he said it lasted a heartbeat too long. You don't know, she whispered, understanding flooding her features. Oh God. You actually think I might have... Number. He reached for her, but she pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. Eleanor. I believe you. But the evidence, she repeated bitterly. Of course. The data doesn't lie, right? That's what you always say. Trust the numbers, not the noise. And I'm just noise now, aren't I? That's not. Get out. Her voice was quiet, but firm. If you need evidence to believe me, then we have nothing. Get out. Benjamin chose that moment to arrive, using his key, taking in his sister's tears and Marcus's rigid posture with the quick assessment of someone who'd learned to read trouble early. What happened? They explained in tandem, talking over each other, and Benjamin immediately opened his laptop. Show me everything. The upload link, the emails, all of it. He worked for 30 minutes that felt like hours, fingers flying over keys, terminal windows opening and closing, speaking in half sentences about proxy servers and packet traces. Eleanor sat frozen on the couch, while Marcus paced, his phone buzzing constantly with board members demanding updates. Got it, Benjamin said finally. The upload used a non-standard port configuration. It's subtle, brilliant actually, but it's there. Port 8743 instead of 8443. One digit off, but it routes through a different server entirely. This wasn't just about stealing files, it was about framing Eleanor. They wanted this traced back to her. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Harrison. Has to be. He's been circling for months, looking for weakness. Benjamin pulled up more data. The sophistication of this attack. It's not freelance. This is Nick's group. They're the best corporate espionage team money can buy. Rumor is they've got former state actors, people who used to work for three-letter agencies. Marcus called William Cross again. Within hours, the investigator confirmed what Benjamin had suspected. The Meridian Gallery was real, but Sebastian Rothschild was an actor, hired through 3 shell companies that eventually traced back to Apex Dynamics. His real name was Trevor Mills, Yale Drama School, struggled for years before finding his niche in corporate espionage, playing whatever role the situation required. We can prove the connection, William said over encrypted phone, but not in court. Harrison covered his tracks too well. Everything is plausibly deniable. Then we don't go to court, Marcus said. We go to war. The plan was Benjamin's idea, refined by Marcus's strategic mind, and executed with Eleanor's artistic precision. They had 12 hours before Marcus's deadline with the board expired. If they couldn't prove Eleanor's innocence, they'd prove Harrison's guilt. We give him what he wants, Benjamin said, his young face hard with determination. But we poison it first. They created a honeypot false files that looked like Sterling Industries' next-generation algorithm, complete with enough real code to be convincing but laced with logic bombs that would activate when compiled. Benjamin wrote the code while Marcus crafted the wrapper, making it look like proprietary development work. Eleanor created the social engineering component, the perfect message to make Harrison bite. She sent Sebastian Trevor a message. I have access to something bigger. Sterling's working on quantum compression. Interested? The response came within minutes. Of course, he was interested. The files were transferred that evening, and Benjamin monitored as Apex Dynamics' entire development server farm began attempting to compile the code. They're really doing it, he said, watching the activity on his screen. They're integrating it into their main codebase. The logic bombs detonated at midnight, simultaneous and devastating. Not just corrupting the stolen algorithm, but spreading through every connected system like digital wildfire. Years of Harrison's development work dissolved into chaos, servers crashing and cascade failures that would take months to fully understand, let alone repair. But Marcus wasn't done. He'd had William document every step of the honeypot operation, every communication with the fake Sebastian, every digital fingerprint Harrison had left in his eagerness to steal. When FBI agents arrived at Apex Dynamics with warrants at 6 in the morning, they found Harrison desperately trying to explain why his system showed clear evidence of corporate espionage, why there were payments to known cybercriminal organizations, why his servers contained not just Sterling's code, but fragments from a dozen other companies. The next morning, Marcus held a press conference. He stood beside Eleanor as he explained the attempted theft, the elaborate frame, and the truth about who had really been behind it all. The media loved it. Brilliant woman artist, targeted by corporate villain, saved by equally brilliant CEO who happened to be her boyfriend. It was a narrative that wrote itself. Data told us Eleanor Hartley was guilty, Marcus said to the assembled press. But data, without context, is just noise. The context was that someone extraordinary was targeted because of her proximity to me, her talent, and her integrity. She didn't betray my trust, she validated it. He announced Eleanor's promotion to Chief Creative Officer of Sterling Industries, a new position that would oversee all design, user experience, and creative ventures. Benjamin would join as co-head of cybersecurity, the youngest person to ever hold such a position at a major tech company. Harrison Blackwood was arrested that afternoon. The FBI found enough evidence to charge him with corporate espionage, conspiracy, and wire fraud. Apex Dynamics' stock price collapsed. Within a month, Sterling Industries had acquired their assets for pennies on the dollar, absorbing their best engineers and leaving Harrison with nothing but legal bills and a reputation that would never recover. The foundation's relaunch event took place a month later, in the space that had once been the Corner Spoon. Marcus had kept his promise to renovate, turning it into a community art center where classes were free and materials were provided. The walls were covered with student work, and the old booth where he'd first seen Eleanor again was preserved under glass, a monument to second chances. Eleanor's centerpiece painting dominated the main gallery, a massive canvas called Ghost in the Machine, showing two figures reaching through streams of code and color, fingertips almost touching across digital space. The gallery critics called it a masterpiece of modern tension, a comment on humanity persisting through technology. Marcus called it perfect. Standing before it, champagne untouched in his hand, he found Eleanor beside him. Paint still decorated her fingers, despite the formal dress she'd been teaching a kids' class that afternoon, and hadn't quite cleaned up. "You know what the hardest part was?" she said quietly, her voice carrying under the noise of the celebration. "For about 10 seconds, when you first told me, I saw it in your eyes. The doubt. Just a flicker. But it was there. I'm sorry. Don't be. It made what came after mean more. You chose to believe me despite the evidence. That's not faith. That's love. Is it?" She turned to face him fully, and he saw in her eyes the same girl who'd debated him about Gatsby, who'd seen through the green light to the truth beneath. Marcus Sterling, who trusts data above all else, ignored the numbers for me. If that's not love, I don't know what is. "I know what it is," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. The ring inside managed to be both elegant and bold, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds in a pattern that looked almost like binary code rendered in light. "It's knowing that every algorithm I've ever written, every success I've ever had, was just preparation for the calculation that led me back to you. Eleanor Hartley, will you debug my life with me?" She laughed through tears that came suddenly and completely. "That's the worst proposal line in history. Is that a no?" "That's a yes, wrapped in a promise to teach you about romantic metaphors." They kissed as the gallery erupted in applause, but Marcus barely heard it. All he could think about was the rain that had driven him out into the streets, the bell that had chimed when he'd entered that diner, the voice that had called him honey without knowing who he was. Data might rule his world, but sometimes the most important discoveries came from the chaos between the numbers, from the moments when you stopped calculating and started feeling. 6 months later, they married in a ceremony that was both intimate and grand, held in the community art center with guests ranging from tech billionaires to Martha, who made the wedding cake from her secret recipe. Benjamin gave a toast that had everyone in tears, talking about second chances and the courage to take them. Eleanor's father, in his wheelchair with a special easel attached, painted during the ceremony, creating a live portrait of joy that would later hang in the Sterling Foundation's main office. As they danced that night, Marcus whispered in Eleanor's ear, "You know what I realized? That night, I walked in the rain. I wasn't lost. I was finally finding my way home. To the diner, to you. It just took me 15 years and a thunderstorm to get there." Eleanor pulled back to look at him, paint under her fingernails even on her wedding day. Eyes bright with the same fire that had made him lose debate championships half a lifetime ago. Well then, Mr. Sterling, I guess we both finally made it home. Outside, Seattle rain began to fall. Gentle, this time, like a benediction.